What rich people foods actually aren't very good. Story 1, well-done filet steak, DJT style. As in it's expensive, but the cut is not great and bad if well done. Most other steak cuts lead to better steak. All other doneness greats lead to better steak. Only nice way to eat filet is raw in tartar. Then it's delicious. Story 2, I'm not big on seafood. I like squid, calamari, shrimp, yum, sea cockroach, chapitos. Small deep-fried squid. But for the love of Beelzebub, I cannot figure out lobster. It's meh. I've had it on its own. Butter, lobster, rice. It's just meh. Story 3. Caviar, salted fish eggs. Smells just as nasty as it tastes. Utter garbage for a couple $100 a gram. Yes, you can get cheaper stuff, but if the expensive stuff tastes like salt water, why eat the cheap shit? Story 4. I don't have any problem with gold foil. It's for aesthetics, and as much as people Reddit seem to shit on presentation of food, it is an important part of cooking. Charging extra for 25 cents of foil is stupid as hell, though. I see it as no different than using food coloring and icing or whatever. No flavor, no nutritional value, just aesthetics. Charging extra for it is the shitty part, not the ingredient itself. Story 5. My dad and I like to drink whiskey from time to time, and some of the best ones are 30 euros. While some of the expensive whiskey like Blue Label are nothing spectacular, and you are just better off with whiskeys like Glenlivet or Glenfiddich. Story 6, snails in uni. Snails. I tried them when I lived in Germany. They have the rubbery texture of way overcooked mushrooms and no flavor. Also, I always had to be drunk to eat them. On the plus side, they served as garlic butter delivery vehicles, but for the most part, yuck. Uni, I was told you have to get past the sight, smell, and texture to enjoy it. Nope. Story 7. Basically everything truffle that's not an actual truffle being shaved in front of you and onto your food. Truffle oil is a chemical compound made in a lab. Truffles at the start of truffle season 2. They've not ripe, but the industry digs them up to meet demand. Source: I work with truffles. Story 8. Most rich people foods aren't very good and are highly overrated. Half of that shit was made by the poor, and rich folk found out about it and raised the price so high that the poor couldn't afford it, therefore making it only for the rich. Still doing it today. Story 9. I went to a crazy fancy place for Valentine's Day, and my BF spent way too much. He got lamb chops, and I got pasta that they make the sauce in a Parmesan wheel. Everything had a particular way it was supposed to be presented, even the drinks. We both got food poisoning and were violently throwing up and shitting in our hotel room. I was overpriced, and honestly I could have made it at home for cheaper and seasoned way better. Story 10. I just think a lot of you guys have never had quality foie gras. Goose liver foie gras, spread delicately thin on a thin slice of fresh baguette, is one of the best things you can eat. I've also had other things claiming to be foie gras, including as an extra feature on burgers that I tried cause, well, I gotta try it. And they might well be, but quality varies greatly. It shouldn't taste fatty or acidic or anything. It should be a delicate and buttery flavor. Also, I sort of think it's a travesty to heat it. Story 11. I don't know if this is considered rich, but a lobster roll is like $25-40 in Boston. I had one and it was not good. Too much salad in there with little lobster. Bun was dripping with butter oil. Roll was tiny. Like in my mind, I can imagine what a lobster roll tasted like, but I was severely disappointed. All I can taste was celery, runny mayo, and butter on a soggy bread with small pieces of lobster. Story 12. A lot. Caviar tastes like slimy tapioca made of salt. Black truffles taste like fart smell, and also a little bit like burning rubber. Bought a $1.14 piece of artisan Gruyere cheese for a French onion soup recipe I was making, and it tasted just like regular Swiss cheese. String cheese, even. My grandpa was rich. No, the wealth did not trickle down. He spent every penny, and I'm not mad because he deserved it. Loved Grandpa and still miss him. Anyway, he used to take us to all kinds of weird, fine dining when we were kids. 99% of it was pretentious BS. Occasionally, our little kid minds would be blown with something. I'm still impressed by, and love, baked brie with raspberries and little crackers. Oysters are basically snot. Unless you get them Rockefeller, then they are delicious. Story 13, gold leaf. Literally just tasteless prettiness. Black truffle, but I love it. It tastes like gas and garlic. Yum. Pheasant. Squab both tiny crap birds. Fish eggs. Pass. 100-year-old balsamic vinegar. Saw it on TV on a burger not worth the money. Shark fin. It tastes like nothing, I hear. It's just fancy to be fancy. Same with whale. Story 14. Although quail eggs are regarded as opulent, some people may not find much of a flavor difference between them and chicken eggs. Although beluga caviar is expensive, some palates find its flavor to be excessively salty or briny. Due to ethical issues, foie gras is controversial, and not everyone enjoys its rich, fatty flavor. Truffle oil is frequently used to enhance the flavor of food. However, it frequently lacks the complexity and depth of actual truffles. Although Kobe beef is prized for its deep marbling, some people feel that the pricey cut is excessively rich or shallow in flavor. Story 15. Most of them. Foie gras, don't eat this, it's cruel. Tastes like the fat you would cut off of a steak. Shark fin, don't eat this either. Tasteless. In shark fin soup, you taste the soup rather than the shark fin. Abalone, a high-value ingredient in Asian cuisines but totally tasteless. Beluga caviar, I like the red eggs they use in sushi much more than this. Black truffles, they're fine, but what's the big deal? Story 16. Lobster. Tastes like whatever you season it with. It used to be a good exclusively eaten by the poor about 100 years ago. It's basically an underwater bug. Then the rich started eating it and it suddenly was unaffordable by most people. Story 17, all of it except a good steak, high-end champagne, and some whiskey, but even then there's barely any difference from the mid-range stuff. A $1,000 bottle of whiskey is not 10x better than a $100 one. Frankly, all rich people foods leave me disappointed and hungry, and I've tried everything except duck vomit and snails. Story 18. I used to work on a boat in France, very rich people shit. And on one of the days, they went to a Michelin star restaurant, so one time I had the opportunity to join them. Don't get me wrong, it was nice and very posh, but I wouldn't personally pay those like €600 for one singular meal. The portions were pretty small, the food was tasty and presented beautifully, but I need more food lolo. Story 19. Foie gras is repulsive. It's the undercooked gristle you get on a strip steak. And that's before you consider how monstrous the process is that produces it. I'm hardly a vegetarian, but I prefer not to torture a dumb animal to get my food. Kopi Luwak coffee is much the same. In the unlikely event what you buy is actual factual Kopi Luwak, only 5% of what's sold as Kopi is real, you're almost certainly getting beans from the ass of a caged civet cat that was force-fed pounds upon pounds of coffee cherries in lieu of a normal diet. Oh, and it doesn't taste particularly good. Get an under-roasted sour coffee bean, and you've replicated the stuff without the animal torture. Story 20. I went to a fancy steakhouse in New York and got filet mignon. My employer paid for it. $300 for dinner for 2 people. No alcohol. It was meh. My wife's London broil is better. I had a $1.12 falafel from a truck earlier that day. That was better. The fancy steakhouse sous vide the steak, which gives it a slightly mushy and overly uniform texture, not as good as what you get from a home broiler. Story 21. I don't like truffle anything. It tastes weird to me. Brut champagne is also very dry. Seems weird that a liquid would taste dry. Also reminds me of aftershave. Wagyu seems like it would taste only of fat. That's not great at all. I would prefer an avocado. I'm vegetarian, so maybe it's lost on me to begin with. Story 22. Overpriced steak. Hear me out. I'm Scottish, and was a chef in my past. Second chef for the record, but ran full lunch service with 90 covers. Steak was on the menu, about 5 per service, and also cooked the steak on dinner service as a second, about 20 out of 150. So I know meat cooking and how to do it right. And despite TV shows eschewing people's preferences, can produce a perfect well done too. Pregnant ladies tend to be risk-averse and want to avoid any perceived risk, and that doesn't mean they don't get a nice meal. Anyway, braised cheap cuts of beef are equivalent to my best sirloin. Fall-apart meat slow-cooked, utter heaven. As for fillet steak, when someone orders rare with no sauce, ridiculous, no flavor. Customer gets what the customer wants. Customer is always right. Even when they're utterly wrong, buy the braised beef special instead, or at least sirloin or ribeye, something marbled with fat, aka flavor. It's cheaper and it's tastier. Story 23. Not a rich person. Caviar is nice but not worth the price. It's fish eggs, for crying out loud. It's delicious, but it's not all that. The worst rich person food I've ever tasted is a toss-up between oysters or lobster. Oysters were clammy and snotty and repulsive in texture, while lobster was unsightly to look at, unremarkable in flavor, and slightly chewy. Lobster used to be considered peasant food, and I can understand why. Story 24. I went to this restaurant a few years ago for a family birthday, one of those places where you dress up nice. I have a pretty rich uncle who picked and paid for about 10 of us, and the bill came to about $800 USD. I got salmon, and it was a tiny, pretty bland portion for far too much money. We also ordered a mac and cheese platter. I'm a picky eater, and it's a huge safe food for me, and it had onions in it. Bleh. Story 25. Don't know if raw oysters can be considered rich person food, but I have no idea how anyone can eat those slimy ocean boogers that can potentially kill you. They look revolting, too. How that was ever considered an aphrodisiac, I haven't the slightest. Nothing sexy or attractive about watching someone slurp down a lump of salty slime. Story 26. I don't know this firsthand, and I don't intend to ever find out, but it is commonly related by the people that do that shark fin doesn't really taste like anything at all, and has a texture that's mildly rubbery at best, and tends more towards unpleasantly squishy or crunchy, which can describe many, many other foods. So the people who go in for it are apparently doing so primarily because they want to have the fins while the sharks don't. I would, at least, understand if it was delicious. I am forever tormented by my inability to taste roasted elephant heart, which is apparently amazing because I don't condone killing elephants for my personal whims, and don't see calling a zoo to ask if I can snag them choice cuts when they have an elephant die being a productive or pleasant conversation. But I want that because I hear that it's friggin' tasty, not because I would feel very cool eating it. Story 27. Caviar. Fish eggs. Pretty disgusting, actually. I had a job once where it was around somewhat often, and I was like, hey, who eats this disgusting stuff? Caviar refers only to roe from wild sturgeon in the Caspian Sea and Black Sea, beluga, osetra, and sevruga caviars. The term caviar can also describe the roe of other species of sturgeon or other fish, such as paddlefish, salmon, steelhead, trout, lumpfish, whitefish, or carp. Story 28. Almost everything that is very expensive, apart from gold leaves, is incredibly good, in its true form. A really good Perigord truffle, really good caviar. These things are being used for money-making because the real deal stuff is just that effing good. Unfortunately, foie gras de canard oie entier is amongst the most delicious things that exist. I don't consume it, but I hope that one of the many startups trying will succeed in replicating it without animal cruelty. Story 29. Lots of foie gras hate in here, but I had it on a splurge at a high-end market in Paris, Fouchon, I believe. You could buy it by the mg like it was drugs. I bought 20 euros worth, 2010-ish, and it came with some bread. The amount appeared to be about 2 tablespoons to me. USA. I spread it on toast, and it was like the richest, smoothest butter with an amazing mouthfeel and nuttiness. That was my introduction to foie gras, and I've never had one that's even close since. I also wouldn't rush to spend that much on minimal food again, but if I was rich and lived in Paris, I'd have it every Friday matched with wine. It was heavenly. Story 30. I learned way too late that most high-end caviar is kind of gross, but trout caviar is relatively inexpensive and legitimately delicious. It just melts in your mouth and tastes like a high-quality oil butter with no excessively salty, briny taste. Story 31. The best food I have ever had was in a hotel restaurant in Lodz, Poland. Cheap as fuck, too. But the serving sizes were so massive that honestly I felt really bad because I could only down a quarter of each meal. I never go hungry with tiny restaurant meals. I'm not a large person, and frankly people eat too fucking much and too fucking fast. A fine dining serving size with a dessert is a complete meal to me. Satisfying. Poor people restaurant meals really do sometimes make up for mid-quality with the amount of food served to con the customer into thinking that they got their money's worth, even if the entire eating experience is ruined because they're too full, but don't want to waste food.